My name is Casper, and at 65 years old, I never expected my life to take such a dramatic turn. For decades, I hammered nails and poured concrete, barely making ends meet. Then fortune smiled on me in the most unexpected way. After 10 years of silence, my son Thomas suddenly called when news of my wealth spread. His Thanksgiving dinner invitation seemed like a chance to heal old wounds, but what happened that night left everyone at the table speechless. If you are watching this right now, let me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that subscribe button and join me for a story about family, forgiveness, and what true wealth really means. I grew up in Millfield, Ohio, a small town where everybody knew your business before you did. My father worked at the steel mill, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthier families in town. They taught me the value of hard work and honesty, lessons I carried with me throughout my life. At 22, I met Eleanor at a friend's barbecue. She had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen, and within 6 months, I asked her to marry me. We had a simple wedding at the local church, nothing fancy, just friends and family celebrating our love. 2 years later, Thomas was born, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. Holding my son for the first time, I promised I would give him everything I never had. Working construction wasn't easy. Some months we had plenty of work, others we barely scraped by. Eleanor took a part-time job at the local diner to help with bills, but we were happy. Our little rental house wasn't much, but it was home. Every night, I would come home covered in dust and sweat, and Eleanor would have dinner waiting. Thomas would run to the door shouting, "Daddy's home." Those were the good days. When Thomas turned 8, Eleanor started getting headaches. At first, we thought nothing of it, but they got worse. The doctor visits started, then the specialists, then the tests. Brain tumor, they said. Inoperable. The medical bills piled up faster than autumn leaves. Our savings disappeared within months. I picked up extra shifts, worked weekends, anything to pay for treatments that might give Eleanor more time. Despite everything, I tried to be there for Thomas. We would go fishing at Crawford Lake on Sundays, just the two of us. I taught him how to bait a hook and the patience needed to wait for the fish to bite. "Life is like fishing, Thomas," I told him once. "Sometimes you wait all day and catch nothing. Other times you catch something wonderful when you least expect it." He nodded like he understood, though he was only 10 at the time. Baseball became our thing. Thomas had a natural talent. I never missed a game if I could help it, even if it meant going straight from the construction site, still covered in dust. I would cheer from the bleachers until my voice gave out. Those moments, watching my son hit a home run, made all the struggle worthwhile. Eleanor fought hard for 8 years, but cancer is a merciless enemy. She passed away when Thomas was 16. The day we buried her was the coldest day of my life. And not because of the weather. Thomas stood beside me, tall and strong, but I could see the pain in his eyes, the same pain that was tearing me apart inside. The months that followed were dark. I started drinking too much, staying out late at Jimmy's bar just to avoid going home to an empty house. One night, Thomas found me passed out on the couch, an empty whiskey bottle on the floor. The look of disappointment on his face sobered me up quicker than any cold shower. "Mom would hate seeing you like this," he said. He was right, and that was the day I poured every bottle in the house down the drain. Thomas became distant during his senior year of high school. The close bond we shared seemed to fray at the edges. He spent more time with his friends, came home later, and our conversations grew shorter. I chalked it up to teenage rebellion and grief. We were both processing Eleanor's absence in our own ways. When Thomas got accepted to Riverdale University, I was bursting with pride. Neither Eleanor nor I had gone to college. Thomas would be the first in our family. The tuition was steep, steeper than anything I had ever paid for, but I was determined to make it happen. I took on a second job as a night security guard and picked up weekend work doing home renovations. My body ached constantly, but knowing Thomas had a chance at a better life kept me going. 80-hour work weeks became my new normal. I would finish my construction shift at 5, grab a quick dinner, then head to the security job until 4 in the morning. 4 hours of sleep, and then back to construction. My hands developed calluses on top of calluses. My back complained every morning when I got out of bed. But each time I wrote that tuition check, I felt like I was doing something right. Our relationship continued to strain. Thomas came home less frequently during breaks. When he did visit, he would talk about his new friends, their ski trips, their summer homes. I could see a different world was opening up to him, a world I knew nothing about. Sometimes, I would catch him looking around our modest home with new eyes, as if seeing its shabbiness for the first time. "Why do you keep that old truck?" he asked me once. "It breaks down every other month." "Because it still has some life in it," I answered, "and we cannot afford car payments right now." He just shook his head and changed the subject. That was the beginning of the growing gap between us, a gap I didn't know how to bridge. Thomas met Amanda during his sophomore year at Riverdale. She was studying business administration, came from Connecticut, and according to Thomas, her father was some big-shot investment banker in New York. The first time Thomas mentioned her, his eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before his mother died. "You should see their house, Dad," he told me during a rare phone call. "It's right on the water. They have their own dock and everything." I was happy for him, truly. But something in his voice worried me, a note of longing for things we had never had. 6 months into their relationship, Thomas invited me to meet Amanda and her parents, who were visiting the campus for the weekend. I wore my best shirt, the one I saved for special occasions, and even bought a new pair of jeans for the dinner. I wanted to make a good impression. The restaurant they chose was fancy, the kind with cloth napkins and more forks than necessary. Amanda was pretty and polite, if a bit reserved. Her parents, Richard and Judith Blackwell, were another story. From the moment I sat down, I felt their eyes assessing me, taking in my weathered hands, my simple clothes, my obvious discomfort in such an upscale place. "So, Casper," Richard said, swirling his wine glass, "Thomas tells us you work in construction." "Yes, sir. For over 25 years now." "Interesting," he replied, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Always good to have someone who can fix things around the house, I suppose." Judith barely spoke to me directly, instead peppering Thomas with questions about his classes and future plans. "Law school is essential if you want to make real connections," she said at one point. "Richard can introduce you to some of his colleagues at Hartman and Price." Throughout the dinner, Thomas seemed different, laughing too loudly at Richard's jokes, agreeing with everything Judith said. He kept glancing at me nervously, as if afraid I might say or do something embarrassing. I tried my best to be engaging, to show them I was more than just a construction worker, but the conversation kept moving to topics I knew nothing about: expensive wines, European vacations, prep schools. By dessert, I felt like a stranger to my own son. When the bill came, Richard grabbed it smoothly. "My treat," he said. I tried to insist on paying my share, but he waved me off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Please," I insist. "It's nothing." Except it wasn't nothing to me. That dinner probably cost more than I made in 2 days of work. Over the next year and a half, Thomas spent most holidays and breaks with Amanda's family. He would call occasionally with excuses about study groups or internship opportunities, but I knew the truth. He was choosing a different life, one where I didn't quite fit. When graduation approached, I saved for months to buy Thomas a nice watch. Nothing extravagant by Blackwell standards, but it cost me nearly a month's rent. I wanted him to have something special, something that showed how proud I was. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. Sitting in the audience, watching Thomas accept his diploma, I thought of Eleanor and how proud she would have been. Tears ran down my face, both happy and sad. After the ceremony, we were supposed to meet for a celebratory dinner. The Blackwells had arranged everything at an exclusive restaurant. I arrived early, nervous but excited. The watchbox was wrapped in silver paper, tucked safely in my jacket pocket. When Thomas arrived with Amanda and her parents, there was already a tension in the air. "Sorry we're late," Richard announced. "We were finalizing details for Thomas's graduation gift." Judith beamed. "We've put a down payment on a condo in Boston, near the law school. It's a much better investment than renting." Thomas looked embarrassed but pleased. They insisted. "Dad." I nodded, feeling the watchbox grow heavier in my pocket. After appetizers arrived, I pulled out my gift. "It's not a condo," I joked weakly, "but I wanted you to have something special." Thomas opened it slowly. "Thanks, Dad," he said, barely glancing at the watch before setting it aside. Richard peered at it. "Is that a Timex? I remember having one of those in college. Decent starter watch." The comment stung, but what hurt more was Thomas's obvious embarrassment. He quickly changed the subject, talking about his plans for law school and an internship Richard had arranged. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly invisible. After dinner, in the parking lot, things came to a head. Amanda and her parents had gone ahead to bring the car around. "You could have at least pretended to like the watch," I said, the hurt finally finding its voice. Thomas sighed. "It's fine, Dad. I appreciate the gesture." "The gesture? I worked overtime for 3 months to afford that watch. And they bought me a condo without blinking," Thomas shot back. "Don't you see the difference? So that's what matters to you now? How much something costs?" "It's not just about the money," Thomas said, his voice rising. "It's about the future, about moving up in the world. Look at yourself, Dad. You're 60 years old and still breaking your back for minimum wage. Is that what you want for me?" His words hit me like a physical blow. "I worked hard to give you opportunities, Thomas. I put you through college so you wouldn't have to struggle like I did. And I'm grateful, but now it's time to move on," he said coldly. "Amanda's family can open doors for me that you never could. They understand the world I want to be part of. And I don't fit into that world, is that it?" Thomas looked away. "You're an embarrassment, Dad. The way you dressed tonight, the way you talked to the waiter, that cheap watch. I can't have you holding me back." I stood there, stunned into silence. My own son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, was ashamed of me. "I think it's better if we take some time apart," Thomas continued. "I need to focus on law school and my future with Amanda. You're cutting me out of your life because I embarrass you?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "I'm moving on from my past," Thomas said, as if that explained everything. "Please try to understand." That was the last real conversation we had for a long time. I called him repeatedly over the next few weeks, left voicemails that went unreturned. I sent letters to his new address in Boston, explaining how much he meant to me, how proud I was of him despite our differences. They came back unopened, returned to sender stamped across the envelopes. 3 months after graduation, I drove to Boston, desperate to talk face to face. I found their condo building, an elegant brick structure in a trendy neighborhood. The doorman wouldn't let me up. "Mr. Thomas isn't receiving visitors," he informed me politely but firmly. I waited outside for hours, until I finally saw Thomas and Amanda exiting the building. I called out to him, started walking over. The look of horror on his face stopped me cold. He hurried Amanda to their car, ignoring my pleas to just talk for 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, I received legal papers. Thomas had filed for a restraining order, claiming I was harassing him and Amanda. The document described me as unstable and potentially dangerous. Reading those words, written by my own son, broke something inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. I didn't fight the restraining order. What would be the point? You cannot force someone to love you, to want you in their life. The legal document just made official what was already true. My son had decided I was no longer his father. The first year without Thomas was the hardest. I kept expecting the phone to ring, for him to realize what he had done and reach out to make amends. Every time the phone actually did ring, my heart would leap, only to crash back down when it was just a telemarketer or work calling about a schedule change. Construction work gets harder as you age. Jobs I could do easily in my 30s and 40s began taking a toll on my body. My knees ached constantly, and my back would seize up if I moved the wrong way, but I kept working. What else was there to do? My small apartment felt emptier than ever, with only Eleanor's old photographs and memories for company. Financial pressures forced me to downsize even further. I moved from my 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-room studio across town, in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The rent was cheap, and that was all that mattered. I sold most of my furniture, keeping only what would fit in the smaller space. Looking around that tiny apartment the first night, I thought about how far I had fallen from the life Eleanor and I once dreamed of. Every year on Thomas's birthday, I would buy a card, write a message inside about how much I missed him, how I was always here if he needed me. Every year, the card came back unopened. After the 5th returned card, I stopped sending them, but I still bought one each year, kept them in a drawer beside my bed. Some wounds never fully heal. You just learn to live with the pain. I learned about Thomas passing the bar exam from a small announcement in the Riverdale University alumni newsletter that somehow still came to my address. There was a picture of him in a suit, looking confident and successful. I cut it out and put it in my wallet, a small connection to the son who wanted nothing to do with me. 2 years later, the same newsletter announced his marriage to Amanda. The wedding had taken place at her parents' summer home in the Hamptons. I imagined the lavish celebration, wondered if anyone there even knew Thomas had a father, or if he had erased that part of his history completely. Through a chance encounter with one of Thomas's old high school friends, I learned Amanda had given birth to a boy they named James. I had a grandson I would likely never meet. That night, I drank for the first time since Thomas's senior year, trying to numb the ache of missing not just my son, but now this new life I would never be part of. Work became increasingly scarce as I entered my late 50s. Younger men were stronger, faster, could work longer hours. Contractors began calling me less frequently, and when they did, they assigned me lighter tasks, which also paid less. My savings, what little I had, began to dwindle. The accident happened on a Tuesday in October. I was working on a roof repair when the scaffolding collapsed. I fell 12 feet onto concrete, fracturing 3 vertebrae in my lower back. The pain was excruciating, but the realization that my working days might be over was even worse. Workers' compensation covered some medical bills, but the payments were barely enough to survive on. At 58, I was forced into early retirement with a body too broken to work and a monthly disability check that didn't cover rent and food, let alone any extras. For months, I shuffled between doctor's appointments and physical therapy sessions, learning to live with chronic pain and limited mobility. The medical bills kept coming, an endless stream of papers reminding me how precarious my situation had become. It was during one of these physical therapy sessions that I ran into Walter Griggs, an old friend from my early construction days. Walter had left the industry 20 years earlier to start his own business installing solar panels. We got to talking after the session, catching up over coffee at the diner across from the medical center. "Never thought I'd see you in a place like this, Casper," Walter said, gesturing to the physical therapy center. "You were always the careful one." I shrugged. Scaffolding gave way. Nothing careful about that. Walter nodded sympathetically. "How are you getting by? Financially, I mean." I told him the truth about the disability payments, the dwindling savings, the growing fear of ending up on the street. Walter listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "I might have something for you," he said finally. "Not physical work, but an opportunity." Walter explained that his solar panel business had evolved. He had developed a new type of efficient panel and was looking for investors to help scale production. "It's risky," he admitted, "but I believe in this technology. It could be huge in the next few years." I laughed bitterly. "I appreciate the thought, Walter, but I can barely afford groceries. I am not exactly investor material." "How much do you have saved?" he persisted. "All I need is a few thousand to secure a patent. After that, we can approach bigger investors." The conversation stayed with me for days. I had exactly $5,822 in savings, money I had been holding onto for emergencies. Investing it in Walter's untested solar technology seemed foolish, borderline desperate. But what future did I have otherwise? Another 10 years of barely scraping by on disability until Social Security kicked in, living in constant fear of a medical emergency that would bankrupt me completely? A week later, I called Walter and agreed to invest $5,000, nearly everything I had, in exchange for a small percentage of his company. He was ecstatic, promising this would change both our lives. I was less convinced, but felt I had little to lose. The years that followed were lean. Walter's company, Sunstream Technologies, struggled to gain traction. The prototype panels worked well, but manufacturing costs were high, and larger competitors dominated the market. I lived on what remained of my savings, then credit cards, then whatever odd jobs my damaged body could handle. For 3 years, I heard little from Walter beyond occasional updates about technical improvements and promising meetings with potential partners. I had largely written off the investment as a desperate gamble that hadn't paid off. Then, on a cold morning in December, almost 4 years after our initial meeting at the diner, my phone rang. Walter's voice was so excited I could barely understand him. "Casper, we did it. Green Tech Industries wants to buy us out. The patent, the technology, everything." I sat down slowly on my threadbare couch. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means we're rich, old friend. They're offering $87 million for the company. Your share comes to just over $4 million. I thought it was a cruel joke at first. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. But Walter kept talking, explaining details about the buyout offer, the lawyers handling the paperwork, the timeline for the deal to close. "I need you to come to the office tomorrow to sign some documents," Walter said. "Can you do that?" I agreed, still not fully believing this was real. That night I barely slept, afraid I would wake up and discover it had all been a dream. The check arrived 30 days after signing the buyout papers. $4,322,000 made out to Casper Johnson. I stared at it for hours, unable to process that the string of numbers was real, that it was mine. For a man who had counted pennies to buy groceries just weeks before, the amount was incomprehensible. My first thought was of Eleanor, how she had believed in me even when times were tough, how she had never complained about our modest life. "If only you could see this," I whispered to her photograph. "You always said things would work out." The bank manager's eyes widened when I brought in the check. They ushered me into a private office, offered coffee, suddenly treated me like I mattered. It was a strange feeling after years of invisibility. "Mr. Johnson, we'll need to set you up with our wealth management team," the manager explained. "With a sum this size, proper investment strategies are essential." I nodded, feeling out of my depth. To be honest, I do not know the first thing about managing this kind of money. Over the next few weeks, I met with financial advisors, lawyers, and tax specialists. They spoke a language I barely understood: options, portfolios, capital gains, trusts. I listened carefully, asked questions when I could formulate them, and tried to make decisions that felt right. One advisor suggested immediate extravagance, a mansion, luxury cars, exotic vacations. "You have worked hard your whole life," he said. "Now you can enjoy the fruits of your labor." But that approach didn't sit well with me. After so many years of struggling, the idea of suddenly living like a king seemed wrong somehow, disconnected from who I really was. Instead, I bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice, quiet neighborhood. Nothing flashy, just solid construction with a good roof and a small yard where I could plant a garden. I paid cash, the first home I had ever owned outright. The feeling of having a key to my own front door, knowing no landlord could ever evict me, was worth more than any mansion. I set up a retirement fund, made sure my medical needs would be covered for life, and donated a portion to the cancer research center that had treated Eleanor. The rest I invested conservatively, following the advice of the more level-headed financial advisors. My life settled into a new normal. I volunteered at the local veterans center, teaching basic carpentry skills. My back still ached most days, but the freedom from financial worry eased other pains. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up in a cold sweat about bills. The local newspaper ran a story about Walter's company and the buyout. They interviewed me briefly, including a photograph and a quote about investing my life savings in a friend's dream. "Local man's rags to riches" story read the headline. It was strange seeing my name in print, my ordinary face looking back from the page. The article circulated online, picked up by a few larger news outlets always hungry for heartwarming success stories. I received emails from strangers, some congratulating me, others asking for money. I answered the former and deleted the latter. 3 weeks after the article appeared, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another person looking for a handout. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Dad, it's Thomas." His voice, so familiar yet strange after all these years, made me sink into the nearest chair. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Dad, are you there?" "Yes, I finally managed. I'm here. I saw the article about you, about the money." His tone was hard to read, cautious perhaps, with an undercurrent of something else. "It's amazing news. I'm happy for you." "Thank you," I said, still processing the reality of hearing my son's voice after 10 years of silence. An awkward pause followed, filled with unspoken words and unresolved pain. "I've been thinking," Thomas continued. "It's been too long. We're family. We should be in each other's lives." I closed my eyes, feeling a complex wave of emotions. Joy that he wanted to reconnect, suspicion about the timing, hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to heal old wounds. "I'd like that, Thomas," I said carefully. "Great," his voice brightened. "Actually, Thanksgiving is coming up in a few weeks. Amanda and I would love to have you over for dinner. You could meet James and our daughter, Lily." your grandchildren. My heart contracted at the thought of meeting the grandchildren I had only seen in my imagination. I would like that very much. Perfect. I'll text you our address. It'll be casual, just family. After hanging up, I sat motionless, the phone still in my hand. 10 years of silence, broken only after I came into money. The timing was suspicious, the sudden interest in family connection convenient. Yet underneath my wariness was a desperate hope that this could be genuine, that Thomas had matured, had realized the importance of family beyond status and wealth. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, I swung between excitement and anxiety. I bought presents for my grandchildren, books and toys I hoped they would like. I had a suit tailored, wanting to look my best. I even practiced what I might say, how I would react to seeing Thomas again after so long. The night before Thanksgiving, I took out the stack of birthday cards I had bought over the years, the ones that were never sent or were returned unopened. Each contained messages of love, of forgiveness, of unchanging devotion despite everything. Reading them again, I realized I had never stopped being Thomas's father, even when he had stopped being my son. "Eleanor," I whispered to the empty room, "guide me tomorrow. Help me find the right path forward, whatever that might be." As I placed the cards back in their drawer, a strange calm settled over me. Whatever happened at dinner tomorrow, I would face it with dignity and an open heart. That was all I could do. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. I woke early, too nervous to sleep past dawn. The presents for my grandchildren were wrapped and waiting by the door, bright paper and ribbons that seemed to symbolize my fragile hopes for the day. I spent extra time getting ready, making sure my suit fit properly, that my tie was straight. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The last time Thomas had seen me, I was a broken-down construction worker with calloused hands and worn clothes. Today, I looked almost prosperous. Would that make it easier for him to accept me back into his life? The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. Thomas and Amanda lived in Lakewood Heights, an exclusive suburb 30 miles from my new home. As I drove through the neighborhood, each house seemed bigger and more imposing than the last. Perfectly manicured lawns, luxury cars and circular driveways, the unmistakable signs of wealth and privilege. Their house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a large colonial-style home with white columns and a 3-car garage. I sat in my car for a few minutes, gathering my courage, before collecting the presents from the back seat and walking to the front door. My finger had barely touched the doorbell when the door swung open. Thomas stood there, older than I remembered, his boyish features now more defined, his hair expertly cut. He was dressed casually but expensively, a look that suggested careful effort to appear effortless. "Dad," he said, his voice catching slightly, "you made it." For a moment, we stood awkwardly, neither quite knowing what to do. Then Thomas stepped forward and gave me a brief, stiff hug. The formal gesture from my own son, once a little boy who would leap into my arms without hesitation, nearly broke my heart. "Come in. Everyone's excited to meet you," Thomas said, stepping back to let me enter. The interior of the house was immaculate, with high ceilings and expensive-looking art on the walls. The smell of roasting turkey and fresh flowers filled the air. Thomas led me through to a large open-plan living area where a group of people were gathered. "Everyone, this is my father, Casper," Thomas announced. Amanda approached first, as perfectly polished as I remembered, though her smile seemed forced. "Welcome, Casper. It's been a long time." "Thank you for having me," I replied, trying to sound warm despite her obvious discomfort. Two children looked up from where they were playing on the floor. The boy, who I assumed was James, appeared to be about 8. The girl, Lily, was younger, maybe 5 or 6. My grandchildren, seeing me for the first time. "James, Lily, this is your grandfather," Thomas said. James stood up politely and extended his hand, a miniature adult gesture that spoke volumes about his upbringing. "Nice to meet you, sir." Lily was less formal, looking at me with curious eyes. "Are you really my grandpa?" "Daddy said you were lost." The innocent comment hung in the air awkwardly. Thomas cleared his throat. "Lily, remember what we talked about? Grandpa was just living far away." I knelt down, ignoring the twinge in my back, to be at Lily's eye level. "I was lost for a while, but now I'm found, and I brought you something." I handed her the wrapped present, then gave James his as well. While the children opened their gifts, I became aware of 2 other people in the room. Richard and Judith Blackwell, Amanda's parents, had aged but were still unmistakably the same couple who had looked down on me a decade earlier. Richard stepped forward, hand extended. "Casper, what a remarkable story we read about you. From construction worker to millionaire practically overnight. Absolutely remarkable." His handshake was firm, his smile broad. The contrast between this warm welcome and his dismissive attitude years ago was jarring. "Hardly overnight," I said mildly. "The investment took years to pay off." "Yes, but what vision you showed. I always say it takes a special instinct to spot a winning opportunity." Richard clapped me on the shoulder as if we were old friends. "We should talk sometime. I have some investment ideas that might interest you." Judith's greeting was equally effusive, though her eyes remained calculating. The children have been so excited to meet their grandfather. Family is everything, isn't it? Dinner preparations were underway, so we all moved to the dining room, an elegant space with a long table already set with what looked like expensive china and crystal. Thomas offered me a drink, hovering nervously as if afraid I might break something. The grandchildren seemed pleased with their gifts, though James quickly returned to a tablet device that apparently held more appeal. As Thomas and Amanda put final touches on the meal, I overheard a conversation between them in the kitchen, their voices carrying despite their attempt to speak quietly. "Did you mention the proposal to him yet?" Amanda was asking. "Not yet. After dinner would be better, when Dad's more relaxed." "Dad's right, we cannot wait too long. The opportunity window is closing." I know. I'll handle it." The snippet of conversation confirmed my growing suspicion. This reunion wasn't about reconciliation or family bonds. It was about my newfound wealth and whatever opportunity they wanted me to invest in. Dinner itself was a strange affair. The food was excellent. The conversation carefully steered towards safe topics: the weather, the children's school activities, the latest movies. Thomas asked polite questions about my new house, making no mention of the decade of estrangement or the pain it had caused. Richard dominated much of the discussion, telling stories about his business successes, name-dropping prominent people he knew. Judith complemented these tales with anecdotes about charity galas and social events that sounded more like networking opportunities than actual philanthropy. Throughout the meal, I watched my son, the Thomas I knew, the boy who had loved fishing and baseball, who had cried openly at his mother's funeral, seemed buried beneath layers of performance and pretense. His laugh was too loud, his gestures practiced. Was any part of my son still there, I wondered, or had Richard and Judith's world consumed him entirely? "So, Casper," Richard said as Amanda served dessert, "Thomas tells me you've become quite the savvy investor. That solar technology play was brilliant." "It wasn't strategy," I admitted. "Just a friend with a good idea who needed support. Nevertheless, you must have an eye for opportunity. I'd love to pick your brains sometime." Amanda shot a meaningful glance at Thomas, who cleared his throat. "Actually, Dad, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. A business opportunity we're excited about." "Oh?" I said, taking a sip of water. Thomas became animated, more genuine than I'd seen him all evening. "Richard and I have been working on a development project. Luxury condos in an up-and-coming area downtown. The location is perfect, the design is innovative, and the profit margins look incredible." Richard nodded approvingly. "The first phase is already fully funded, but we're looking for capital partners for phase 2. Given your recent windfall and our family connection, we thought you might want to be part of it." "What kind of investment are we talking about?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Thomas and Richard exchanged glances. "We're looking for partners at the $2 million level," Richard said smoothly. "Of course, for family, we could be flexible." $2 million. Nearly half of everything I had. The pieces fell into place with painful clarity. The sudden reunion, the Thanksgiving invitation, the warm welcome from people who had once deemed me unworthy of their company, all motivated by access to my money. "It's not just about the return, though that will be substantial," Thomas added quickly. "It's about leaving a legacy, creating something lasting." Amanda joined in, her voice earnest. "We've been thinking about family a lot lately, about connections. James and Lily should know their grandfather, and this project could be something that binds us together." It was all I could do to maintain my composure. The manipulation was so transparent, yet delivered with such practiced sincerity. Suddenly, I needed a moment alone, away from their expectant faces and calculated kindness. "Would you excuse me?" "I need to use the restroom," I said, rising from the table. In the pristine guest bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. The hurt was overwhelming, but beneath it was something else, a clarity I hadn't expected. I reached for my wallet and took out the worn photograph of Thomas I had carried for years, the one from the alumni newsletter. Next to it was a much older photo, Thomas at 10, holding up a fish we had caught together, his smile wide and genuine. The contrast between those two images, between the son I had known and the man now sitting at the dining table, told me everything I needed to know. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the dinner. When I returned to the dining room, Richard had pulled out a sleek laptop and was showing Thomas and Amanda something on the screen. They looked up guiltily when I entered, like children caught planning a raid on the cookie jar. "Casper." "Perfect timing," Richard said, turning the laptop toward me. "I was just showing Thomas the latest renderings for the development. Beautiful, aren't they?" On the screen was an architectural visualization of gleaming glass and steel towers, surrounded by meticulously landscaped grounds. It looked like a dozen other luxury developments I had helped build over the years, though I had always entered through the service entrance. "Very impressive," I said, taking my seat again. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. "We're calling it Blackwell Towers. The location is prime, just 3 blocks from the river, walking distance to all the best restaurants and shops." "Sounds perfect for people looking for luxury living," I commented. "Exactly," Thomas agreed. "And as an early investor, you'd have preferred access to purchase a unit yourself. I know your new house is nice, but this would be a significant upgrade." Judith, who had been relatively quiet during the business discussion, suddenly spoke up. "It would be lovely to have you closer to us, Casper. Family should stick together." I nearly laughed at the irony. 10 years of silence, and now family should stick together when there was money to be gained. Amanda reached over to touch my hand, a gesture that seemed rehearsed. "We're finally becoming a family worth being proud of. James and Lily deserve to grow up knowing their roots, their history." "Their history," I repeated slowly. "And what history is that, Amanda? The one where their father cut me out of his life because I embarrassed him? Or a different version where I conveniently disappeared until I became wealthy enough to be acknowledged?" A tense silence fell over the table. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, while Amanda withdrew her hand as if burned. "Dad, that's not fair," Thomas protested. "Yes, we had our differences, but people change. I've grown up. I see things differently now." "What things do you see differently, Thomas? My worth as a person? My value as a father? Or just my bank balance?" Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should table the business discussion for another time. Today is about family reunion, after all." I looked around the table at each of their faces, Richard's forced joviality, Judith's thin smile, Amanda's barely concealed annoyance, and Thomas's confusion. Only the children seemed authentic, watching the adult tension with wary eyes. Something settled in me, then a certainty about what I needed to do. I reached for my jacket pocket and took out my checkbook, an old-fashioned thing I still carried despite my financial advisor's suggestion to use electronic payments for everything. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about family too," I said, uncapping my pen. "About legacy and what that really means." Thomas's expression brightened. "So you are interested in the investment?" "I'm interested in truth, Thomas. In authenticity." I began writing on the check, my hands steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "When I received that money, do you know what my first thought was? It was about your mother, about how she always believed things would work out for us someday." I continued writing, filling out the amount carefully. "My second thought was about you. I wondered if you would hear about it, if it would matter to you. I even fantasized that maybe it would bring you back into my life, that we could repair what was broken." "That's exactly what's happening, Dad," Thomas interjected. "We're rebuilding our relationship." I looked up at him. "Are we? Or are you just interested in what I can do for you now?" No one spoke. The only sound was the grandfather clock in the corner, ticking away seconds of uncomfortable truth. I finished writing the check and held it up. $2 million, I said. "The amount you were hoping I'd invest in Blackwell Towers." Richard leaned forward, unable to hide his interest. Amanda's eyes widened, and Thomas looked relieved. "I've written this check, but not to you," I continued. "It's made out to the Eleanor Johnson Children's Medical Fund, a foundation I've just decided to create at the hospital where your mother was treated. It will help families who cannot afford care for their children, who work multiple jobs and still cannot make ends meet, who sacrifice everything for the people they love. Their faces transformed from expectation to shock. Thomas's mouth opened and closed without words coming out. "You invited me here because you thought I would give you money," I said, my voice steady. "But true wealth isn't about dollars in a bank account. It's about integrity, about honesty, about recognizing what truly matters in life." I stood up, placing the check on the table where everyone could see it. "Your mother understood that. She never cared about fancy houses or expensive things. She cared about love, about family, about being there for each other through good times and bad." "Dad, wait," Thomas began. But I held up my hand. "There's something else you should know. I've already donated most of my fortune. The house I bought was modest because I never intended to keep the money for myself. I established scholarships for working-class kids, funded programs for injured construction workers, set up support systems for single parents struggling to make ends meet." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the children sensed the gravity of the moment, watching with solemn faces. "I came here today hoping to reconnect with my son, to meet my grandchildren, to find family again," I continued. "Instead, I found people looking to profit from a relationship they discarded when it wasn't financially beneficial." Richard finally found his voice. "Now wait just a minute, Casper. That's not entirely fair. We've all made mistakes." "Yes, we have," I agreed, "and I'm trying not to make another one today. I won't invest in your towers, Richard, but I will leave something far more valuable, if you're wise enough to recognize it. The truth about what really matters in this life. And it isn't this." I gestured around at the opulent room, the expensive furnishings, the trappings of wealth that had seduced my son away from who he truly was. I turned to my grandchildren, kneeling down despite my aching back. "James, Lily, it was wonderful to meet you both. I hope we'll see each other again someday. Remember that your worth isn't in what you own, but in who you are and how you treat others." Then I straightened and walked toward the door, leaving behind stunned silence and the check that would help countless children in Eleanor's name. I had just reached my car when I heard the front door open behind me. Turning, I saw Thomas running down the driveway, no jacket despite the November chill. "Dad, wait, please." I paused, my hand on the car door. Thomas stopped a few feet away, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "You cannot just leave like this," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to talk." "We had 10 years to talk, Thomas." "You weren't interested then." I know. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, mussing it in a way that suddenly made him look more like the boy I remembered. "What you said in there, you're right. About all of it." I stood quietly, waiting. This moment felt important, fragile, and I didn't want to break it with the wrong words. "I became someone I never wanted to be," Thomas continued, his voice cracking. "Someone Mom would have been ashamed of. Someone I'm ashamed of." A tear slid down his cheek, then another. He made no move to wipe them away. "When I saw that article about you, about the money, I thought it was a sign, a chance to fix things. But I did it all wrong, didn't I? Made it about the money again." "Yes," I said gently, "you did." Thomas looked down at the perfect lawn beneath our feet. "After Mom died, I was so angry. At the cancer, at the world, at you for not being able to save her. Then I met Amanda and the Blackwells, and they showed me a different world, one where people didn't struggle or suffer, where everything seemed easy and perfect. Nothing real is perfect, Thomas. Nothing worth having comes easy." He nodded slowly. "I wanted to escape the pain, the memories. I convinced myself I was moving up in the world, but really, I was just running away." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep inside me. For the first time in years, I was hearing my actual son, not the polished facade he had created. "Can we start over?" he asked quietly. "Not because of money or investments or any of that. Just because we're father and son, and I've wasted too many years pretending that doesn't matter." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I saw only regret and hope, vulnerability and fear. The same expressions I had seen on his face as a boy, when he'd made a mistake and was waiting to see if forgiveness was possible. "Starting over isn't easy," I said carefully. "Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. It takes time and consistent effort. I know. I'm willing to put in the work if you'll give me a chance." I thought of Eleanor then, of what she would say in this moment. She had always been the one to counsel forgiveness, to believe people could change if given the opportunity. "I'm not moving into any luxury condo," I said finally, "and I'm not investing in any development projects." "I understand," Thomas said quickly. "That's not what this is about. If we do this, it's on new terms, honest terms. No pretense, no performances. Just two people trying to rebuild something that matters." Thomas nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve in a gesture that reminded me powerfully of his childhood. "I'd like to introduce you properly to James and Lily, if you're willing." "I'd like that," I said, "but not today. There's been enough drama for one Thanksgiving." We agreed to meet the following weekend, just Thomas and the children, at a public park near my home. A neutral space where we could begin the slow process of getting to know each other again. As I drove home that night, I felt lighter somehow, as if a weight I had carried for 10 years had begun to lift. Not completely gone, but eased. There was a long road ahead, but at least we were walking it now, rather than standing on opposite sides of an uncrossable divide. The weeks that followed were tentative, awkward at times, but marked by genuine effort on both sides. Thomas came alone for our first real conversation, a 4-hour talk at my kitchen table where we said things that had needed saying for a decade. There were tears and raised voices, painful admissions and difficult truths. We emerged, exhausted but somehow cleansed, like a festering wound finally lanced and beginning to heal. Amanda was less enthusiastic about our reconciliation, especially after realizing there would be no financial benefits. But she was civil when we met, and over time, I saw hints that she too might be reassessing her values. The birth of their third child, a boy they named Michael after my father, seemed to soften something in her. The children were easier. James, initially reserved, opened up when he discovered I knew how to build model airplanes, something that fascinated him but that neither Thomas nor Richard had patience for. Lily was naturally affectionate, climbing onto my lap during our third meeting and staying there while I read her the stories her grandmother had once read to her father. I found purpose beyond family reconciliation as well. The Eleanor Johnson Children's Medical Fund became my primary focus. I worked with hospital administrators to structure programs that would help families like ours had once been, caught between modest means and catastrophic illness. Each time we provided assistance to a family, I thought of Eleanor and the struggles we had faced together. Thomas, to my surprise, began volunteering at the fund, using his legal expertise to help families navigate insurance claims and medical billing disputes. The first time I saw him sit with a weary, frightened parent, explaining paperwork with patience and compassion, I glimpsed the man Eleanor had always believed he could become. My relationship with Richard and Judith remained distant, which was fine with me. They had been cordial at our few meetings since that Thanksgiving, but the easy warmth they had shown when they thought I might invest in their project was notably absent. Thomas, I noticed, spent less time seeking their approval as well, making his own decisions rather than following their prescribed path. The following Thanksgiving was different in every way. We gathered at my house, a simple meal prepared together rather than served on fine china. Thomas arrived early to help cook. Amanda brought homemade pies instead of store-bought, and the children ran through the house with the abandoned joy that had been missing in their more formal home. As we sat around my dining table, mismatched chairs pulled in to accommodate everyone, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said. "Not the kind that's perfect or wealthy or impressive. The kind that's real. The kind that makes mistakes, falls apart, and finds its way back together again." I looked at my son, at the man he was becoming rather than the man he had tried to be, and felt a profound gratitude, not for the money that had brought us to this point, but for the wisdom to see its true purpose. Wealth had reopened a door, but it was love that had allowed us to walk through it. Later that evening, after the others had gone home, I sat on my porch looking at the stars, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. From construction worker to millionaire, from estranged father to reconnected family man, from broken to healing. "You were right, Eleanor," I whispered to the night sky. "Things do work out, just not always in the ways we expect. Sometimes the greatest riches come disguised as loss. Sometimes the most valuable investments yield returns we never anticipated. And sometimes, when we stand firm in what matters most, we discover that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love." What about you? Has money ever revealed someone's true character in your life? Have you experienced a painful family estrangement? Or found your way back to reconciliation after years apart? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. And remember that in this journey we call life, the most precious currency is not the dollar, but the connections we forge with those we love.